Here's something most people never learn in school. For roughly 500 years, while much of Western Europe couldn't reliably produce a book, a civilization stretching from Spain to Central Asia was preserving, translating, and expanding on the greatest ideas of the ancient world, ideas that would otherwise have been lost forever. Without this civilization's work, there's a real argument that the European Renaissance, as we know it, simply doesn't happen. This is the story of how Islamic scholars quietly saved the foundations of Western science, medicine, and philosophy. If stories like this interest you, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps this channel keep making them. To understand why this story matters, you have to understand what actually happened in Europe after the fall of Rome in the 5th century. The collapse of centralized Roman administration led to centuries of fragmentation, economic decline, and a dramatic drop in literacy and formal education across much of Western Europe. A period historians once broadly labeled the Dark Ages, though modern historians increasingly push back on how uniformly dark this period actually was across the continent. Still, one thing is well established. Enormous amounts of classical Greek and Roman scholarship, foundational texts in medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy from figures like Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy became increasingly rare, poorly copied, or simply inaccessible across much of Western Europe during this period. Many original Greek texts vanished from European libraries entirely for centuries. Meanwhile, in a very different part of the world, something else was happening entirely. Starting in the 8th century, under the Abbasid Caliphate based in Baghdad, a massive, state-sponsored effort began to collect, translate, and study scientific and philosophical texts from across the known world. Greek, Persian, Indian, and Syriac sources among them. This effort centered around an institution known as the House of Wisdom, though the broader translation movement extended well beyond that single institution across the Islamic world. Scholars translated the works of Aristotle, Plato, Galen, Euclid, and Ptolemy into Arabic, often working from Greek texts that had already become rare or lost in their original language elsewhere. But this wasn't simply copying. Scholars across the Islamic world didn't just preserve this knowledge. They built on it substantially, correcting errors, expanding on theories, and producing entirely new original work in medicine, mathematics, optics, and astronomy that would later flow back into Europe centuries later. The mathematician Al-Khwarizmi, working in Baghdad in the 9th century, wrote a foundational text on solving equations. The word algebra itself derives from the Arabic title of his work, and his name is the direct root of the word algorithm. This wasn't a minor contribution. It's a foundational pillar of modern mathematics, still taught in classrooms worldwide today. In medicine, the physician Ibn Sina, known in Europe by the Latinized name Avicenna, wrote an extensive medical encyclopedia in the early 11th century that would go on to become one of the most widely used medical textbooks in European universities for roughly 600 years. Well into the 17th century, students at universities across Europe, including Oxford and the University of Paris, were still studying his work centuries after it was written. In Muslim Spain, the physician Al-Zahrawi, often called the father of modern surgery, developed and documented surgical techniques and instruments that directly influenced European surgical practice for centuries. Many of the basic surgical tools he described bear a direct lineage to instruments still used in refined form in operating rooms today. In optics, the scientist Ibn al-Haytham, working in the 10th and 11th centuries, developed a scientific approach to studying light and vision built on systematic observation and experimentation, an approach many historians of science consider a genuine precursor to the modern scientific method itself. Centuries before, it's traditionally credited to European scientists like Francis Bacon and Galileo. This wasn't isolated genius happening in a vacuum. It was the product of a civilization that, for several centuries, built institutions, libraries, hospitals, observatories, and universities, specifically designed to generate and preserve this kind of knowledge at a scale unmatched anywhere else in the world at the time. This vast body of knowledge didn't stay contained in the Islamic world. It reached medieval Europe primarily through two major points of contact: Muslim Spain and the Norman Kingdom of Sicily, both places where Muslim, Christian, and Jewish scholars often worked in close proximity. The city of Toledo in central Spain became one of the most important translation centers in European history. After the city came under Christian rule in 1085, it retained a large population of Arabic-speaking scholars, along with extensive libraries of Arabic scientific and philosophical texts. Over the following 2 centuries, teams of translators, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars working together, often collaboratively translating from Arabic into Latin, systematically brought this knowledge into the broader European academic world for the first time in centuries. This is how the works of Aristotle, largely lost to Western Europe in their original Greek form, were reintroduced, not directly from Greek, but through Arabic translations and the extensive commentaries written on them by Islamic scholars, most notably the philosopher Ibn Rushd, known in Europe as Averroes. His commentaries on Aristotle became so influential in medieval European universities that he was sometimes referred to simply as the commentator in European scholarly circles for centuries afterward. This flow of knowledge fed directly into the rise of Europe's first universities in the 12th and 13th centuries, and later became a genuine foundation stone for the European Renaissance and scientific revolution that followed. If this contribution was so significant, a fair question is, why isn't it more widely known today? Historians point to a few overlapping reasons. Centuries of political and religious conflict between Christian Europe and the Islamic world, particularly during and after the Crusades, shaped how this history was later told, often minimizing or erasing the Islamic world's role in favor of a narrative that credited European achievement almost exclusively to a direct, unbroken line back to ancient Greece and Rome. Modern historians of science have increasingly pushed back on this framing over the past several decades, and this period is now more widely recognized in academic history as a critical, non-optional link in the chain that connects ancient knowledge to the modern world. Even if that recognition still hasn't fully filtered into popular understanding or general education, the story of Western science isn't a straight line from ancient Greece directly to the European Renaissance. It runs through Baghdad, through Cordoba, through Toledo, through centuries of scholars across the Islamic world who didn't just keep the lights on during a period when much of Europe's own intellectual tradition had gone dark, but who genuinely expanded human knowledge in ways that shaped the modern world we live in today. It's a piece of history that belongs to everyone, not as a footnote, but as a foundation.